Okay, so let's talk hope for a second. Because if you've been watching or have tuned into the previous episodes, you will have heard me talk about some of the things that I think are particularly important at this time during Masculinity's work, but also in previous episodes before those, I speak a lot about the challenges of the work and how we navigate or negate some of those challenges. And what I want to do in this episode today is I want to give you some hope. Okay, I want to give you some hope and not just abstract hope, but anecdotal hope from some of the work that I do, some of the work that I've done. Because if I'm being really attuned, but also very aware of some of the content that I put out and some of the wider cultural messaging that we see around masculinities, specifically work with masculinities in schools, there is a cultural construction that we go into schools and we're just dealing with absolute madness on a day-to-day basis. And to use the words of the young people that I work with, we're cooked because these guys are just so not just manosphere adjacent, but manosphere bathed, and they're just so disrespectful. They're so um, dysregulated and so disengaged. And I want to just very, very intentionally create some hope and also, as I say, add some reality to the work that we're doing and root this in the real. Because whilst there is conversations that need to happen in relation to some of the things that I've mentioned, the manosphere and some of the ideas of masculinity that are linked to and normalize misogyny, sexism, violence against women and girls, etc., there's also some really, really hopeful strands within that work that I think are really important to focus on and to name. Because if I'm looking at the general landscape at this point in time, there is a lot of dysregulation and a lot of polarization when it comes to this area. If you don't do it this way, you're this. If you do it this way, you're that. And like if you approach it this way, that means you must think that boys are this. Like there's a lot of camps existing, and also as a result of that, a lot of different, at times, conflicting methodologies and ideas that are permeating the space. So I want to give you some hope. And I want to give you some hope in relation to some of the things that I'm seeing, some of the things that I've seen, but also some of the things that I know in relation to the work that I do and the young people that I engage throughout my sort of day-to-day deliveries, if you will. So if you're new to this episode or to this podcast space, I'm a masculinities educator. That is the title that I use, and I work with a range of young people, but specifically young men in mostly educational spaces. So specifically, if we go into the granular, secondary schools and young people aged 11 to around 18, but I also work with younger and I also work with older at times too. And I've engaged at the time of recording, over the years that I've been doing this work, I've engaged, upwards of 20,000 young men specifically in conversations around masculinity, misogyny, sexism, violence against women and girls, masculine identity in general, gender equity, gender-based violence, all of these intersecting and important areas of discussion when it comes to cultivating and crafting masculine identity, but also being able to compassionately, curiously critique some of those inherited ideas that we often receive as men and boys in the space. And often when I explain to people what I do for a job, and also, to be honest, some of the content that you see from me online, I've some of the work that I've done in the past, or some of the content of mine that's gone viral, are typically the most like shock inducing stuff. So, the assembly stuff, right? Where, there's a loud ovation for a photo of Andrew Tate, for example, or ideas and belief systems expressed around women and girls that, cause a lot of dysregulation. Oh my gosh, that's happening in schools. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Like I have spoken to and about some of the extreme presentations, some of the extreme articulations of what masculinity should be from the eyes of young men and boys. But also, what I think is really important to talk about in this episode is the population of boys, young men, young masculinities that are actively, intentionally, curiously partaking in this work that often don't get named in this discourse in this moment in time because the other stuff is so pressing and at times so polarizing. Now, to be super clear, this is not me saying that we should stop focusing on maybe some of the manosphere adjacent or manosphere bathed young people, in relation to ideas around women, ideas around masculinity, ideas around conducting and behaving in spaces and communities in an educational context. Absolutely not. But I do see and I do notice that some of the work that is hopeful and some of the work that is rooted in genuine I would say genuine curiosity and genuine compassion and genuine criticality often miss gets missed out of the conversations that we're having. And I want to spend some time just talking about that today. Because whilst there are boys and young men who are in proximity to the ideas of masculinity we've come to know or recognize as regurgitations of some of the manfluences and regurgitations of some of the numerous polarized figures in the online sphere, there are also a a growing population of boys and young men who are not only rejecting some of those ideas and some of those belief systems, but are interested in exploring and expanding some of their scope for masculinity. One of the things that I've been seeing increasingly over the past, I would say, 18 months to a year, the population of boys who are actually actively evidencing some critical reflection and engagement. I don't follow those particular people. I used to, but here's what changed my ideas or my perspectives relating to them. Here's what I learned, or here's what I unlearned in that process. And here's what I'm trying to figure out at this point in time. There is a growing population of self-aware, reflective young men and masculinities in the context of education who have seen some of this content, who are aware of some of these people, are aware of these ideas, these concepts, and these, lived experiences, but are also curious and critical to expand and explore some of their own proximities to those ideas, but also expanding those ideas beyond what might be comfortable or beyond what might be expected. I think that's something really important to recognize, because some of the conversations that I've been having over the past 18 months to a year have actually been conversations like, well, Lewis, we're talking about masculinity at this point in time. And for me, and kind of where I'm at this point, I'm kind of thinking, do we need these binarized, gendered expectations, or can we move towards more of this is what it means to be a good human being? That's a school kid. That's a sixth former, right? That's someone on the brink of just leaving, year 11 into year 12, having these type of reflective thoughts, who has gone through a process of I was here, then I moved to here, and I'm exploring this, and I'm now arriving at this conclusion based off of what you've been kind of talking to us about. There is evidence of not just criticality, but intentional, personal grapple with the content and a genuine curiosity to dive deep into the source materials, to have the conversations, but also to be wrong. I think this is really important to mention, because often what we see, again, understandably, is the extreme embodiments, reflections, and articulations of masculine identity that fuel some of the more panics around masculinity work and masculinity discourse in schools. The sort of adolescent-esque ideas and beliefs and behaviors, or the documentaries that have come out. Oh yeah, we see this in our schools, and we definitely see this too, right? Again, massively important conversations, but conversations that, if you're an educator watching this podcast and in a space that you're a part of, can feel very dysregulating, but also stressful, because it's like, well, where's the hope? Is this the case for everybody, or is this what we're all faced? How do we begin challenging that? And I've spoken about that in previous episodes, but I also think it's really important to recognize there are young people, young men in this context of this conversation, who are actively involved in that process and are actively exploring some of their own taken for granted assumptions, not just through proximity to workshops and reflective spaces, but doing it for themselves, arriving at their conclusions that actually what I initially believed in to begin with isn't serving me. It's not true. This person who's saying this isn't actually like this in real life. So there's a bit of a performance there that I'm getting kind of dragged along here. I'm being taken for a fool in this case. And I don't like that. That's not what I want to be. And also, as I'm growing older and as I'm maturing, that's not who I want to be in the space as well. There's a self-awareness that comes with young boys that we often aren't naming or aren't making intention to really tap into. Because from a other perspective, right, from the other sort of different perspective, you've got those thought leaders, let's call them thought leaders in the context of their school community, who can be used to engage in conversations, to introspect and reflect with their peers. There are young people in the space and communities that you're a part of in the education space specifically, who are wanting or able to have those conversations, right? It's about empowering them and building them up into those spaces. That's a separate episode, perhaps. But there is hope. And I think it's really easy to lose hope when all we see is a plethora of this example, this point, this point. But what I'm seeing, in addition to some of those ideas and beliefs and behaviors, again, they are there, they are present, they are real, and our responses are valid. There is also a population of young boys in the context of school and education that are actively, intentionally, curiously going through that process too. So if you're an educator watching this and you're like, I don't know, I've got lost hope, recognize that even within your school space, there will be young people who are ready to take that step, or maybe actively taking those steps in relation to exploring what it means to be a man from different ideas and perspectives. This isn't a one size fits all indoctrination. We are seeing now the generation of boys that may have been Manosphere adjacent or perhaps even Manosphere bathed at younger points in their life growing into a point now where they're starting to reflect outside of what they've been taught. Life experience is giving them different lenses, but also different echo chambers might be giving them different lenses, different inputs might be giving them different lenses. And that's not to say now we should stop engaging young men because they'll figure it out for themselves. That is not what I'm saying. But what I think is important to recognize is that there is that process of criticality that I can see anecdotally through the work that I'm doing that is really important to name because I don't see it named enough. So let me know if you want some more on this because I got some more thoughts on this and I've got some more experience in this space. I've been having some really, really interesting conversations with young men and masculinities about all things gendered experience, gender-based violence, how that transitions into male violence and violence against women and girls. Real rich, reflective, you know, academic conversations with boys who are doing some of the deep work. And so if you want to hear more about that, then let me know and I'm more than happy to do so. But I just wanted to provide some hope in this episode and hopefully, no pun intended, this hits you in a space where it isn't just the specific archetype of masculinity showing up in the context of schools. There are boys who are willing and able and are evidencing their own growth, their own curiosity, and their own criticality in this process of what it means to be a man. So I'm going to leave this episode here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you're well. I hope you're blessed. And I will hopefully see you in a future episode very, very soon. Stay well now. Bye bye.